With that then, let me start first part and talk about strategies that were followed. And the point I'll be making here is there were great discontinuities between sets of strategies that were adopted beginning with our intervention in Afghanistan in 2001 until today. And we've paid a price in terms of credibility in the region and credibility with the Afghans with those policy discontinuities. And then secondly, come on to talk about these challenges that the Afghans and we are facing as we work our way through transition and our troop withdrawals continue. First of all, on strategies. What you can see with these strategies, 2 points up front. Influenced by a set of domestic policy factors, and secondly, look for mismatches of ends, ways, and means as the strategies and policies are developed. 4 strategies I'll talk about. From 2001 to 2003, we've had, at that time, the United States has had initial great success against al-Qaeda and their presence in Afghanistan, having pushed them across the border into Pakistan, and we've had great success against the Taliban. So we spend, from 2001 initial intervention, we spend the next several years focusing heavily on the pursuit of al-Qaeda and trying to push for their final destruction and to keep Taliban from being able to regroup and come back into Afghanistan. We employ the methodology called the light footprint, a light footprint meaning not a lot of troops, not a lot of embassy personnel on the ground. We believe, and frankly the Afghans believe at this time, the time is very much on everyone's side. Important at this point in time as well is that in Washington, D.C., especially in the Pentagon, there is no appetite for trying to bring a much larger, ambitious coalition force into Afghanistan. NATO volunteers to come into Afghanistan, and the administration says no. Why? We don't want to get ourselves entangled in Afghanistan, find ourselves under restrictions in our campaign against al-Qaeda and Taliban. Also at this point in time, not a deep understanding of Afghanistan at all, and we all, again, to include the Afghans, we dramatically underestimate the complexity of the mission and the resources that are going to be required. Second period, 2004 to 2008. At this time now, Taliban's beginning to reconstitute itself. We're starting to see very significant emerging problems with the weakness of the Karzai administration and Afghan governance. International security forces are all brought under NATO command during this period. There's a much more intense, focused effort at state building and building the Afghan national security forces, but resources are insufficient because to the west of that map is Iraq. And Iraq now is starting to consume more and more resources. I'm in command in Afghanistan at this time, and we start to lose our intelligence gathering capabilities. We're starting to lose troop capabilities. And the Department of State also gravitates westward towards Iraq. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2007, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at that time, Admiral Mike Mullen, testifies to Congress and says, in Iraq, we do what we must, and in Afghanistan, we do what we can. Summarize that period of time extraordinarily well. Third period, 2009 to 2011. Taliban gains from about 2006, 2007 to 2009 now are starting to take a real toll on the political stability of Afghanistan. And the security situation is considered to be getting close to a tipping point. So President Obama then, shortly after taking office in early 2009, he orders additional commitments of U.S. military forces and civilian resources to Afghanistan to try to push back against the Taliban momentum, refocus our efforts against al-Qaeda, and work hard to try to, on an accelerated timeline, to build Afghan national security force capacity so they can take over the fight from the international coalition, and to increase the capacity of the Afghan government so they can, in fact, then administer their country and carry out their responsibilities of sovereignty. This was not a small effort on the president's part. When he took office, we had 35,000 troops in Afghanistan. A year and a half later, we have 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. The embassy, when I first went in shortly after the president took office to lead the civilian surge, our embassy had 325 people assigned. When I left 2 years later, we were up to 1,400, the biggest embassy in the world. The development budget that we had at that time, requests that I sent up to the Secretary of State and approved, and eventually approved by Congress, $4.1 billion of aid development in 1 year. Still today, in the history of the United States, the largest bilateral aid budget ever. So this was not a small effort. The president also, as part of the surge, then very quickly announces that he is going to cap the surge and start to pull the surge forces back in the summer of 2011, setting the conditions for Afghan transition, for them to take lead in their sovereignty. Also at this period of time, a dialogue begins between the United States, the Afghan government, and Taliban, faltering and not a linear process at all. The fourth and final period is 2011 then, where the surge force starts to come back home from Afghanistan to the United States, and it will continue to the end of this year with a question mark about what's beyond, maybe something we can talk about in question and answer if you'd like. This transition process will be manifested, first of all, by the Afghan National Security Forces, the Army and police, taking full responsibility for provision of security throughout their country, with some backstopping, some logistics support, and some fire support, probably from the U.S. military, if we're still present in the country. There'll be no detention of Afghan citizens by foreign military forces, and the continuation of the dismantling of development assistance programs that obstruct or constrain the Afghan government, especially at the subnational level. This transition plan now is almost completed. And remember, this transition plan was one that was fully sanctioned by the United Nations, by NATO, by the United States, and by the Afghan government. I would say the credibility of the transition plan right now, though, is problematic. And that is because the United States and Afghanistan have yet to agree to sign a bilateral security agreement. What's the bilateral security agreement? Agreement between Washington and Afghanistan, a binding agreement, primarily a legal agreement, that gives special status to U.S. military forces, and our NATO allies will pick up on that agreement and have their own if we ever sign it. But that gives the United States military legal status in the country, in Afghanistan. In other words, let's say that a U.S. soldier in the act of combat kills or wounds an Afghan civilian. He has or she has legal immunity at that point. That's a matter for the United States to deal with. And unless we get that agreement, there will be no U.S. forces in Afghanistan at the end of 2014, which puts then this entire transition plan at risk, as I'll come on to.